Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're going to get started in just a moment. We're going to give everyone a chance to hop on. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really look forward to having you. We'll give everybody just a minute to hop on here as we get started. All right. I will make sure everyone is still coming in, but let's kick this off. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are coming in from. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on channeling your curiosity to cultivate business relationships with John Reed. He is the founder of Rain BDM, a business development and marketing consultancy that helps lawyers build outstanding client relationships. He and his team provide law firms with various services and support, from one-time projects to outsourced marketing department engagements. He's a former practicing lawyer, so he knows the challenges confronting the profession and changing legal landscape. Differentiation and standing out in the marketplace has never been more critical. I think we all know that. So John coaches attorneys in business development and assists firms with branding and positioning, content writing, strategic planning, graphic design, advertising, corporate social responsibility initiatives, and other marketing needs. He's a former chair of the Legal Marketing Association's Michigan chapter and has served on the Michigan Supreme Court and State Bar of Michigan task forces charged with reviewing ethics and regulations around legal services marketing. He also chairs the board of trustees of Leader Dogs for the Blind, an organization that empowers blind or visually impaired people worldwide to become more independent. We're really happy to have John with us today. As you all know, I'm Lindsay Griffiths, Executive Director of the International Lawyers Network. We're putting on this webinar today. We're so excited to have you with us. John is going to be speaking without slides. If anybody has questions at any time, you can use either the Q&A or the chat box at the bottom of your screen. This is a webinar format, so you won't see yourselves on the screen. Then I will hop in and ask those of John. So he's happy to answer those throughout the presentation. So just drop those in there as you think of them, and I will ask those of John. Okay, so with that, I will turn it over to John and we will get started. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. This is probably the largest stage I've been on, even though I'm sitting in one place just looking at a screen. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are and wherever you may be listening to this if it's being recorded. I love this idea of curiosity being the driving force behind business development. So to go back into my background a little bit more, so practicing lawyer, then I worked with Thomson Reuters, what was then West Publishing, for 11 years in various relationships, account management, sales marketing, and then started this organization I currently have about 15 years ago. And I'm not the kind of guy a firm wants to hire if they want to make the phone ring. Instead, I'm the person that wants to help them build relationships. And I do it very holistically. I want to find what it is in that person that's going to keep that momentum, sustain that momentum to build relationships and have them be fulfilled as they build relationships. So I think that's really important as we're talking about today is this isn't supposed to be contrived. I'm not saying, boom, you now have curiosity, go be a business developer. We want to have you recognize the importance of doing it for yourself and making it your own. And the fact of the matter is, as a lawyer, you are all already intellectually curious. You can't be good at your job if you aren't drawn to asking probing questions or analyzing records and documents and uncovering information that may not otherwise come to light. So you've already got that skill. But being generally curious, or you might even say socially curious, is another matter. So deposing witnesses is one thing, but we don't want to cross-examine our friends and acquaintances, let alone somebody who might be our next best client. And I will tell you, I knew that I was done practicing law when I came home one night and asked my wife, "Are we going out for dinner?" Yes or no. It's a yes or no question. So I think I know the danger of taking your work home with you. But I would also submit that the business of law, and by that I mean market and job demands, partnership tracks, a decrease in mentoring, which has unfortunately happened due to COVID and other situations, has given a lot of lawyers tunnel vision when it comes to business development. And situations like this, that if I go to lunch with a prospect, I need to leave with their business. I'm expected to leave with work. That if I attend a networking event, I'm supposed to generate hard and fast referral relationships with everybody I meet. That if I'm giving an elevator pitch and then telling and selling my talents to that person, that if I don't do that, I won't make an impression on them that leads to an engagement or a referral. And perhaps most harmful is that if I have a conversation with anyone who doesn't immediately demonstrate strategic business development value, that I'm wasting my time having that conversation. Um, I think we had in the description today the statement, it's better to be interested than interesting. And I actually misquoted that. It's from Dale Carnegie in How to Win Friends and Influence People. And the statement actually is to be interesting, be interested. And I think that's a much better way to say it because rather than having a choice, you really don't. You need to be interesting to be interested. And let's think about the weight of that statement for a moment. So if I remove the pressure to close business at that lunch, I can start cultivating a long-term relationship. If my goal at the next networking event is to focus on having two meaningful conversations rather than a whole stack of business cards, it's more likely to lead to long-term bilateral, not just one way, but bilateral referral relationships. And if I ditch the elevator pitch, and I have a really big problem with elevator pitches, I'm happy to talk about that. But if I ditch the elevator pitch and take the spotlight off of myself, I may leave a more positive, lasting impression. And then finally, if I rid myself of that myopia to only converse with people that I think can give me immediate business, then I'm in a better position to generate lasting chemistry and rapport. I can make my follow up easier. I can differentiate myself from others who are still suffering that business development myopia. I can model good business development skills for others. I can make that other person feel worthy and important. And frankly, I can just enjoy talking to that other person without a hidden or maybe not so hidden agenda. So aren't those the behaviors and objectives that we want anyway to become a trusted advisor? Aren't those the characteristics of the relationship we want with a client? And frankly, they expect of us after they had signed the engagement letter. So um, having business development conversations isn't just a means to an end. It's also a way to demonstrate what it's like to work with you once somebody becomes a client or a referral source for that matter. So that kind of sets the stage. But I want to talk more about this idea of trusted advisor. Um, it's kind of an overly used phrase, and it's unfortunate because I think it's still a good one. David Maister wrote a book, The Trusted Advisor. It's just kind of become one of my go-to resources. And I won't bring up the chart or graph or whatever, but suffice it to say that there are two things that have to happen for anyone, but particularly a lawyer, to become a trusted advisor. You need to have more and more interactions. I'm going to call them conversations. And through those conversations, you need to uncover more and more needs. And let's be really careful. We're not just talking about legal needs or business needs, it could be personal needs as well. And so by having more conversations, we can ask more questions, we can get more information and insight into the other person and be in a much better position to help. And as we go along those X and Y curves, this is called the trust line. So the more trust we develop, the closer we are to being to achieving that hallowed ground of trusted advisor. And I think we may have experienced it, each of us, what it means to be a trusted advisor. It's not when your client says to you, gee, John, I wouldn't make a move in my business without asking you for legal counsel. Instead, it's, gee, John, where'd you buy your car? Who do you use for your insurance? Where are you going on vacation? because we're so ingrained and entrenched with that person and they rely on us so much, we may be imputed more expertise than we deserve, but it's because we were interested repeatedly, because we see the value, we honor and respect the other person, that we get to that, as I say, that hallowed ground of being the trusted advisor. So today, I want to walk through a series of short questions, as we talked about in the description. Let's call them the 3+1 questions, because there's 3 that are non-negotiable, they're really important, and then 1 is kind of situational. And these questions will help you to become roundly curious, to show your sincere interest in the other person, and create new opportunities for yourself and your practice. So there are different contexts. You can use these questions in different ways, but let's start with the first context of that initial conversation with somebody. So maybe it's an introduction to someone through a friend or colleague, or a networking event, a bar association meeting, neighborhood holiday party, whatever it may be. And here it is, blockbuster question number 1. What do you do? I know, right? Big question. Easy. We can ask this question because it's ubiquitous. It's the most anticipated and accepted question when we first meet people. What do you do? What do you do for a living? Do you work outside the home? There are variations on it, but it's pretty much all the same. There's nothing wrong with it, so there's no need to fix it. There's no need to be clever and re-engineer it. But I'd say the next question is the most important. And that is, rather than talking about, hey, do you like your job? How long have you worked there? Or if you're stymied, how about that Man U team, or how about those Detroit Lions? The next question is, who are your favorite people to work with? Okay. So we've taken this in a completely unexpected direction. So we want to focus on what that person does for a living, and assuming they work in an organization, by saying, who are your favorite people to work with? We can now have them start talking about their favorite subject, or at least their most comfortable subject, which is themselves. Now, you can tailor that people part depending on what they do. So if you're talking to another lawyer, it could be, who are your favorite clients to work with? Who's your ideal client? If it's somebody in a sales role in an organization, in a company, who are your favorite customers? If it's somebody who's only internally facing an organization, who are your favorite groups or colleagues or departments to work with? You're getting them to open up about what it is they do, and in a very meaningful and differentiated way. So again, this is a question that they probably haven't been asked, at least not in this order. You win by being different. And the other thing is, you're starting off by asking about something that feels good, that's positive. Who do you like to work with? Who's your favorite? Who's your ideal? You're not asking what they don't like about their job or what they would change about their workplace. Instead, it's starting off on that positive note. You are immediately showing your interest in them. You're demonstrating your curiosity. And I think you're priming them. One thing I learned when I took some trial skills classes way back when in my early law career is, when you're talking to an adverse witness, start by asking questions that end in yes, getting them comfortable talking about themselves. So then later, when you hit with the hard questions, they may be more predisposed to cooperate. This is similar to that, in the sense that asking easy questions about which they have all the answers because it's about themselves, it sets things up to really go a little bit deeper, perhaps, and find out some needs later. And what if the person hates their job, if they don't like anybody they work with? They may be doing you a favor by responding that way. So it's not your job to be their therapist or career counselor, but you can ask them what makes them feel that way. And their answer may be a sign that perhaps you need to end the conversation and go someplace else, or follow up in a different way. So it's not that every person is 100% deserving of our investment of time and effort. And this is a way to qualify those maybe not so inviting or not so promising relationships. So assuming they've told you who their workplace besties are, customers, clients, colleagues, whatever, ask this question. Tell me about some things you've done recently with those people. So now we are going into the story phase, and this is critical. And you can change this again. You can alter the question a little bit. Feel free to say, tell me about some projects you've done recently, or some sales you've consummated, or some deals you've done, however it is that makes sense within the context of what they do. And I think why this is important, this idea of stories, is two reasons. One, you get a very detailed understanding of what it is they do. And secondly, you get an education. And I think that's helpful for a couple reasons. So if you had asked and said, what does your job entail? You might get a laundry list. Oh, well, I review contracts and I, call customers or I do whatever. That's nothing that distinguishes them from somebody else who has a similar job or a similar job title. But when you ask them who they like to work with and some special things they do with those people, you may be getting those differentiators, those unique aspects of their world that they're proud to tell you about and that you will remember and keep them top of mind. Your curiosity may actually, how do I say this, may cause them to even tell you more, may motivate them to share even more about their position because they see in you a willing listener. And again, you're demonstrating your interest in them. Your questions, by the way, you can have filler questions. Tell me more about that. I don't think I understand. What do you mean by that? So don't feel it's only these questions. You can kind of add qualifiers in there to learn more. But in the end, your curiosity about them, that's the return on investment. That's the ROI because they're going to give you this information back. Okay. So those are the three questions. And you think about it, it makes sense. It flows. It's not contrived. It is very much a conversation. And I would say, by all means, refrain throughout these initial three questions from doing anything but asking questions. Refrain from going into, oh, me too, and then telling your story. Keep it focused on them. Give them the spotlight. If you think about it, as lawyers, we're the experts. We're trained for 3, sometimes more years in law school, that we have to have the answers. And then we go into practice, clients are calling us, expecting us to give them, learned counsel and sage advice. But when you can turn to somebody who, if they know you're a lawyer and they're not, by asking them about them, by treating them as the expert of their own lives, you're raising up the pedestal, you're evening the playing field. And that is a huge, huge motivator for or generator of trust. And making them feel good about themselves, again, celebrating, honoring them, respecting them for what they do is really, really important. So that's the 3 questions. Here's the bonus question, and we're going to dig more into this in the context of the ILN network as well, but it's this. If I met someone like that, meaning the people that they work with or ideal client or what have you, what questions could I ask them to see if they would be a good fit for you? Okay. So this question, the reason it's a plus one question is it only applies in certain situations, right? And really, we're talking about people who you could help by maybe referring them a new client or customer, a referral situation. Somebody else that would be good to have in your network, and you want to demonstrate an interest in how you might qualify. But the one thing about referrals is they can be messy, right? We meet people and we like somebody and we want to help them by making an introduction, but maybe it's just along the lines of, hey, Lindsay, you need to meet Joe, here's the phone number, give him a call and talk. Well, I didn't do anything to qualify the relationship, but if the person is telling you that, well, we're really only looking for these types of customers or businesses of this size, or we're looking to hire people with these types of job skills or whatever, they're giving you the script. They're giving you the details such that you can be discerning on their behalf amongst the people you know and meet. And they will appreciate you more by not wasting their time if you were to make that introduction or that referral, that you've put in the effort to, again, qualify and make sure the person is a better fit. And I guess we need to kind of step back and think about how we recommend and refer people. Do unto others as do unto you, right? The golden rule. We don't want to have our time wasted either. So we need to give scripts to other people and be very specific. And when you ask those qualifying questions, obviously you become a better matchmaker for the other person. Now, if we look about the series of these 4 questions, 3+1 questions. Um, when you ask these, we talked about the immediate benefits. You get the information, you're showing curiosity, showing interest, and being, and therefore you're interesting to the other person as well. But you are also modeling good business development conversation behavior for that person. I mentioned earlier, unfortunately, it's true in a lot of U.S. law firms and arguably in other parts of the world. Mentoring has fallen off because of billing demands or client demands or whatever it may be. So if you have a colleague with you, maybe even a mentee who's watching you go through this exercise with somebody you're talking to, you're not only showing them, but for the other person who may not be as comfortable in business development conversations, you're letting them know the process as well. And I think what's really important here too is, again, going back to this point of, you don't know the person's value until you talk to them. And frankly, I don't think you understand the person's value until you get to the end of the 3rd question. So I'll give an example. I'm working with an attorney now, solo practice, business litigator, commercial litigator, handles all types of matters from collections to business towards breach of contract and bigger ticket items. And we went through the exercise the other day of kind of talking about who's in his network, who knows a lot of people that could be a good referral source. And he said, well, it may sound crazy, but I have a good friend who's a mechanic, but I wouldn't want to talk to him, would I? And I said, well, why not? If you ask him who his favorite customers are, the favorite types of cars he likes to work on, and who else does he work with in his business, not only are you honoring him, you're raising that pedestal because, his thinking mechanic to lawyer, he may think there's a big disparity there. But if you show him that he's important, that may be helpful. And maybe he's got suppliers or he's got friends or he's got business partners that could help. So I think it also gives us a healthy perspective on being ready to talk to anybody and understanding their gifts and their talents. So let's turn this around. Assuming the person you've been talking to is human, they're probably going to want to reciprocate. And they may say, well, gee, John, we've talked a lot. What about you? What do you do? And they don't have the good fortune, because they didn't attend today, to understand the 3+1 questions. So you've got to take that on yourself. And I would say, use those questions to create your own narrative. So you can say, I do this. I'm a lawyer, I'm a litigator, I'm an estate planner, I'm counsel too, whatever. But then you can go into your spiel and say, and you know what, I really enjoy working with these types of clients. I usually work directly with CEOs and senior leadership of companies, or you know what, I do a lot of estate planning work, and I work with generations of families, and I really love that dynamic. And recently, I handled this type of matter. Recently, I achieved this type of outcome in a piece of litigation or whatever. And yes, you have to be humble, but I think you also have to give them your special sauce. What is it that you do that's different? People hire me, they may say, because I am a bulldog in the courtroom. Or people may hire me because I understand the cost and expense of litigation, and I try to find workable, cost-effective resolution as early in the process as possible, although I will be a champion in the courtroom if I need to be. We specialize in intellectual property due diligence in M&A transactions, and recently we reviewed a whole bunch of assets in a patent portfolio and discovered this, and it was going to be a problem, so we were able to handle it that way. You're now talking about your favorite subject. You're giving them the color commentary on what it is you do in your practice, and you are solidifying, or at least hopefully solidifying in their minds, your story. So you are more memorable to them. You are top of mind. And maybe when they're having their next conversation with a client or customer or friend or what have you, they're going to say, I met this really interesting person the other day that does IP due diligence and mergers and acquisitions. Or I met this person that works with high wealth individuals in their estate plans with a special focus on special needs trusts. whatever it may be. And then they have a story they can tell. And if you then gone so far as to say, the next question, which is their answer to the next question, which is my practice depends so much on word of mouth and referrals. You know, if you ever ran into somebody who fit that bill, somebody who was maybe an owner of a company that had not yet had the need to hire outside counsel, or somebody who's maybe dissatisfied with their current outside corporate counsel or whatever, you know, maybe you could ask them this, or maybe you could see if they'd be a good fit, or you know what, please get in touch and I can give you some questions that you can ask them and maybe make a referral or a recommendation that way. So you're in control, and because you know the questions asking, you're in a really great position to deliver the answers back to them in the same way. Okay. Um, you know, if there's somebody that could be a client, the fact that you've said my ideal client is, or my favorite clients to work with, you know, maybe they'll lob onto that. So you don't have to go into full on sales or closing mode. They'll put two and two together. Um, you know, resist that urge to just pounce. I think what I see in a lot of lawyers in business development conversations is they're talking to somebody and the person will share a need they have. Maybe in the course of these questions, the person says, well, I work this company and I like my job, but we're going through a right sizing, or we're facing litigation now, or you know, they offer up, they volunteer a need or a problem. A lot of attorneys will pounce and say, well, that sounds like it's a really sticky situation. I'd love to be able to help you. Can my firm represent you, or can I introduce you to my colleague at my law firm? Slow down. You know, don't go for the pounce right then and there. Go through the questions, learn a lot, solidify that rapport, that chemistry, that good feeling, that curiosity. There are ways to follow up afterwards, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay. So we've talked about this in terms of a first time meeting, but this works later on in your relationship too. So maybe there's the client you haven't talked to in a while, a dormant client. You know, I often get questions a lot about, well, I went to law school with somebody who's now, you know, a partner in another law firm, or they're assistant general counsel for a company. But it's been too long. I couldn't possibly reach out to them, could I? And I think the answer is yes, you could. And in one form or another, you can use these same questions again. So obviously, you know what they do, but maybe the question be turned into, gee, Lindsay, what are you doing now that's different from the last time I spoke with you? Okay. And if the answer is nothing, same old, that's okay. We can still work with that. If instead Lindsay says, oh, I've changed my practice and I'm now working with these types of clients, or I'm focusing on tech companies or whatever, you're still in a position to go to that next question. So if it's same old, you can say, are you still working with, you know, mid-market companies in the manufacturing space? You know, and who are you know, who amongst them is an ideal client for you? You can still ask that question. Or, well, gosh, in that new direction that you've gone in, who are your favorite customers to work with? Who are your favorite clients? Are you working with different people in your organization than before? So it's a very flexible path you can take with this. And then the third question remains the same. You know, tell me about some things that you've done recently with those people, that client, those customers, whoever it may be. So everything still works the same. It's that same demonstration of curiosity and of interest. It's that same eliciting of stories. It's that same idea of getting the other person to talk about their favorite subject themselves, or at least their most comfortable subject. If that makes sense. Um, I don't see any questions yet from Lindsay, but that's okay. I'll keep going. I want to talk about the idea of follow-up. Oh, Lindsay.
I will pop on really quickly and say, and that's one question that has come to my mind. We have a lot of the referrals that happen within our network are sort of reactive referrals. So obviously a client will come to a member firm and say, you know, I need counsel in, say, England. And so a member will say, great, I have this existing relationship with a firm. I can, you know, I know him very well. I will send you that lawyer's contact information or make the introduction directly. So one of the things that some of our members have done and we encourage them to do is be more proactive about uncovering those potential referrals that are more collaborative. So things that, say, let's leverage the relationships that we have within and among the members, and look for things that we can be more proactive on. So what are the types of questions that maybe they should be asking when they're getting together, either in person or thinking about when they're in between meetings, to be looking at, so that they can be more proactive about those other kinds of referrals, and uncovering the types of matters that may work well, to be more proactive.
Sure. Let me talk about this in the context of cross-selling generally, although I don't really like the term. I think there are better ways to describe it. But I'll start with this story. I recently worked with a firm where they kind of admitted our cross-selling internally is broken. We don't think to involve the person down the hall. It could be I got burned, somebody, harmed a relationship I've had or something like that. So we brought this framework into that firm to say, okay, let's start with a joint practice group meeting. And instead of one person from the practice group getting up and doing PowerPoint slides about bullet point, bullet point, bullet point, bullet point in terms of the things we do, not terribly memorable and not terribly different from the next firm over. Instead, it was, who are your favorite clients to work with? Is that the same for everybody in this group? And obviously you know what they do, so you can skip question one. But then it's, well, what kinds of things have you done recently? Or what is the prevailing matter you're handling for those types of clients? And then maybe you want to go a little bit deeper and say, what are you doing that's different? How did the client react to the outcome? So you're getting a little more meat on the bones. You're memorizing that. And then by asking the other practice group or the other attorney to say, I want to help you. I don't practice in the area that you practice, but give me three questions I could ask, or two or three parameters that I can keep in mind to see if somebody's not, is or is not a good fit for you. And I think what's really important here is, imagine kind of the embarrassment if you don't have that specificity and I were to refer to somebody to you and you have the unfortunate and awkward job of saying, you know what, I'm not a good fit for you. We don't really do that. So I think it's just courtesy at some point that you're able to do that as well. And I think this applies, practice group to practice group in one firm. It applies to hallway conversations between partners in different practice groups. And it could be a very casual or deliberate thing within the ILN network too. It could be that a lawyer in one country at one firm may, if they met somebody maybe recently at your conference, to say, hey, we met in Miami, and I'd love to learn more about your practice. Tell me more. Who do you work with? What kinds of things have you done recently? And how can I help you? What are some questions I could ask? And then, it goes back that way. Or it could be more structured, formal conference calls between people or groups or firms or something like that. But so I think it's not it's more prevalent than just the one-on-one conversation. You can use it for internal conversations as well. And I also say, think about, in the case of a corporate client, for example, think about all the professionals they rely on, right? So maybe they use a management consulting firm. Maybe they use an outside auditing firm. Maybe they use somebody for their uniforms or their lobby rugs or what have you. Those people can be in your referral network too. And because you already have that relationship with the client, you can go to them and say, hey, we have ABC company and client. Joe is a fantastic guy. Let me ask you, besides Joe, who are your favorite clients to work with? And so you're actually being a better business partner to your client as well. So I think you can really extend and extrapolate this in a lot of different directions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we often encourage our firms to get together and have these Zoom calls, across with who they think they're going to have the most business with. And I think often the content of those calls, the question is sort of how do we structure those? And that's a really great framework for what to do with those calls. So I think that does make a lot of sense and is something I'll recommend.
Yeah, good, good, good. I want to go back to something I alluded to the fact that I really loathe elevator pitches. And I guess at its base level, if you think about what an elevator pitch is supposed to be, that you and I are stuck on an elevator together, and I give you this soliloquy on all my, great talents, and your eyes are supposed to go wide open and say, "Thank goodness I've been looking for you all my life. We should do business together." It's ridiculous. And the other problem, the main problem with elevator pitches is they all end in periods. Nobody's ever crafted an elevator pitch that ends in a question. And so the idea of having an opener that, you know, gee, Lindsay, what do you do? And let's make you a lawyer for a second. If you say I'm a lawyer, I'm an attorney, there's a good chance, unfortunately, that you may have had a bad experience if you're a layperson with a lawyer. So you're turning, and forgive the American reference, but now you're turning into the teacher from Peanuts. Wah, wah, wah. Nobody's going to hear you because they've condemned you already, right? But if you say, I help businesses take care of their most important assets, their people. I help inventors protect their intellectual property and monetize that and make money. I help whatever. If you turn it that way, that's all you need. And then hopefully they'll say, well, that's interesting, or I don't understand, or what do you mean by that? Now you get to answer their question with a question, which I know my mother told me was rude, but it works here because you can say, well, let me ask you, do you own a business or do you know of anybody who owns a business? Do you have any inventors in your family? Do you know anybody that owns a patent? And now you can qualify. And
Mhm.
now you can go down this path with them as well. So that, I know it's a little farther afield than the 3+1 questions, but I think we need to be not clever in a gimmicky way, but I think we need to be more personable in how we understand the person we're talking to, understand what misgivings they may have about the legal profession, as unfortunate as that is, and be willing to meet them where they are in a more holistic way.
I say the same thing
Uh,
about your online persona as well, because that is selling you when you're not actively engaging with it. And so, if you just say, I'm a partner at such and such firm, which, that's helpful to me when I'm looking you up. If you say, as you said, I help businesses protect themselves, that is a much more helpful for the businesses that's looking for you. So when you want to explain to your clients what it is that you're doing, or potential clients what it is that you're doing, that tells them more than just, partner at this firm.
yeah,
And so that's doing the work for you that makes that introduction ahead of and tells your reputation ahead of you.
absolutely. And let's not give short shrift to the attorneys that are working with individuals, whether that's estate
No.
planning or real estate or residential real estate or whatever. I would submit that the decision to hire any lawyer for any matter has at least some degree of emotionality to it, right? If it's a divorce, high emotionality. If it's a contract review, low, but you never know. Maybe it's that the last firm that did a crummy job, and that general counsel's feeling the heat to make sure it gets done more effectively or more properly, if that's the right, by this new hire, right? So when you say I help, you're already positioning yourself as somebody who's going to be a service provider as opposed to just somebody with a job title, if that makes sense. So
Hmm. Absolutely.
um, I want to talk a little bit about what you do after the conversation, right? And I'm going to get on another one of my soapboxes, so I apologize in advance. Um, I think we need to, if not banish, at least rethink what we mean by follow up. Okay. So, whether you ask yourself or whether somebody asks you after you have a conversation with somebody, what's your follow up? Our knee jerk reaction is to treat it as a procedure. Well, I'll email them, I'll call, I'll send a LinkedIn invitation, I'll ask them to lunch. And that doesn't that's a how. That's not a what. So a question, I guess maybe this is the plus one question, but this is for yourself, is give yourself some time after you speak to someone and say, what did I just learn that I can act on? Okay. And whether that's looking out your front windshield and when you leave a meeting, or hanging up the phone with a client or a referral or whatever it may be, it's just that. What did I just learn during that conversation that I can act on? And then it becomes substantive. It's a what rather than a how, right? So I learned from them that they're close to retirement and they don't have an estate plan. So my follow up may be to send them an article I wrote on estate planning for retirement. Um, uh, they may say, been promoted to a new position in a firm and they're celebrating by taking a trip to the south of France. Well, maybe you want to send them, I don't know, a travel guide. Maybe you want to send them something helpful that isn't about their job promotion, their business, but is acknowledging this other thing that's really important to them in their personal life, this trip that's coming up. And I've got some great examples here. I once worked with an attorney who called me and said, "Hey, I've got a meeting tomorrow with a client that we haven't talked to, haven't worked with in quite a while, a few years. What am I supposed to say?" And I said, "I don't know." And they were kind of shocked. And I said, "You don't know what to talk about. Talk about them. Ask questions. Find out what's happening." And maybe they didn't ask these same questions, but in the course of that lunch and that conversation, my attorney learned that this general counsel collected antique whiskey bottles. Um, don't know how it came up, but it did. So he called me after the lunch and I asked him, "What did you learn that you can act on?" And we went through a whole litany of things. And then he brought up the whiskey bottles thing. So together we went to Amazon and we found a coffee table book on whiskey bottles, which he then had sent overnight to that person. And she was delighted. She had been heard in a different way. It wasn't that tunnel vision myopia of this guy only wants my business. It was this person's interested in me in a larger context and my hobbies and my interests, and truly heard what I was saying and responded to it. And they got some work out of it. I talked to another attorney that had just a referral conversation. Somebody said, "Oh, you need to talk to so and so and learn more about their business." And that 15-minute meet and greet conversation turned into an hour and a half conversation where she learned the other person was just an ice cream fanatic. And so after the call, she sent a gift card to this place called Jenny's Ice Cream. It's in the United States, and they will ship 3 pints of ice cream to you, freeze dried overnight. And she did that. And the woman called and left about 7 voicemail messages just to get in touch with my friend to almost to the brink of tears, saying, "I can't believe you remembered that. That was just so lovely, so wonderful." Again, I don't want to say it should always be outside of the business context. Maybe it is. Well, you told me you're kind of struggling with your current CPA. I'd love to be able to help you. I've got some names. What's the best way for me to make those suggestions? So again, what did I hear that I can act on, and then make it a reason to do it. Find a reason to do it. And let's go back to the premise here, which is if becoming that trusted advisor is that series of conversations and uncovering those needs, when you can have that mindset from the get-go that this person has a hobby, this person has a business interest, this person has a personal issue, that's one to grow on as you find more needs. And you're setting yourself up for that next conversation and the next conversation, and the next conversation. I heard somebody say recently, "Oh, business development is a marathon, not a sprint." And that's wrong. It's neither, because a sprint and a marathon end, right? This never ends. You have to keep those conversations going. You have to find reasons to reach out. Um, we've done a lot here in 45 minutes. We talked about cross-selling. We talked about that initial conversation, the dormant relationship coming back. We talked about cross-selling or building relationships, either within your own firms or across ILN. I would say if things that we've talked about today have resonated with you, there's 3 pieces of homework that you have. And the first is easy. Memorize the questions. What do you do? Who are your favorite people to work with? Tell me about some things you've done recently with those type of people. And if necessary, what are some questions I could ask if I met someone that fits that description? Okay. Next is ask those questions of yourself and prepare your own narrative. If you were being asked those in reverse, how would you answer them? How could you string them together into a narrative that flows easily, that isn't terribly boastful, gets the message across, demonstrates your special set of skills, and leaves a story in that person's mind that they will remember? Then I'd say, try it out, practice. It won't be comfortable the first time you do it. Most things aren't. So find safe harbors. Find that colleague in your office who's in a different practice area. Call up your trusted colleague in another ILN member firm and try it out. Frankly, I think you'd go to your best client and ask those questions as well. And I think you can flat out say, I'm trying to practice a new technique that I learned recently. Can you help me out here? And I think they may be flattered that you're asking for their advice and showing your vulnerability to them. Talk to other people in your firm, talk to friends, and then even with those practice conversations, be sure to ask that last question, which is, what did I learn that I can act on? And don't think it has to be this magnanimous, huge gesture. It may just be simple, as simple as emailing saying, hey, I heard what you're saying. That sounds like a rough situation. Or I heard what you're saying. I'm so delighted you're taking that trip or whatever. Let me know when you get back. I want to hear all about it. Do something to set yourself up for that next conversation with them to advance the relationship. So that's curiosity. You've got it within you. Maybe you haven't honed and crafted it in the business development sense, but the core strength is there. And we're just trying to find some ways to channel it and help you really build those trusting relationships. Lindsay, I'll take any more questions if there are any.
So far we don't have any. Let me see what
Okay.
I've got. For those of you who are in the chat and the Q&A, you can feel free to drop your questions in there. And let's see what I have here. What do you think, what role do you think curiosity can play in understanding the other challenges that ILN members face in general?
I think if there's anything that you're experiencing, whether you're a managing partner, a practice group chair, um, uh, maybe somebody in an area of practice where the needs are changing because of legislative issues or whatever, to say, who else is encountering this issue? I'm curious to learn. So forget these questions for a minute, right? Um, uh, I think the problem that I see a lot of is I'll just ask Google, or now I'll just ask ChatGPT. And I would say, forego Google, forego the internet, and think about who in your world might have some perspective on this. And so, it could be a US attorney calling up a UK attorney saying, gosh, I'm running into this issue with this client, and I think we've got a way forward, but I'm really interested to know, what does the landscape look like there? If you were to handle the situation, what would it be? Or, we don't have this type of law in Canada, so let me call my French ILN counterpart and talk about that. Um, um, I think truly wanting to be a business partner, I think you can flat out say, how do I help you? I'd like to help you out. My German ILN colleague, what things can I do for you, not only in terms of referrals or recommendations, but is there something else that you'd like to know about how we operate our business or how things might work in the United States? So offering, maybe helping that person satisfy the curiosity they didn't know they had. That may be some way to do it too. So I think it's just being other person oriented but also not having to have the answer right away. To really say who's in my network of my own trusted advisors or my own personal board of advisors or experts, who can I call and talk to, because it's an excuse to have a conversation. um, and that works for clients. Actually, I'd say that's great. If you can ever ask a client, I don't know about much about your business as I should, tell me more. That's huge, and you might learn something along the way. So I think just look for other ways to ask questions and not make them, kind of perfunctory, like, oh, John told me to, but to show that genuine interest.
Hey, Sharon has a couple of great questions. The first one, she's asking if you can just repeat the 3-question framework because she wants to print it out and put it on her office bulletin board.
Okay. All right. So question number 1 is, what do you do? A variation on that for somebody you already know and haven't spoken to a while is, what are you doing now that's different from the last time we spoke? I'm sure you can play with other variations, but that's kind of new and existing. The second question is, who are your favorite people to work with? And again, we can modify that to, who are your favorite clients? Who's your ideal customer? Who are your favorite colleagues to work with in the organization? Something like that. And then the third question is, tell me about some things, some projects or deals or matters that you've recently done with those favorite people of yours. Okay. Get them to tell the story. And then the bonus question on the end is, if this is somebody that's in a position to refer business to you, giving them that script, giving them some guidelines for, what questions could you ask of that person to see if they're a good fit for me?
Great. And then she also asks, are there any cultural constraints or contexts where such curiosity could be seen as rude or intrusive?
I guess I would say, Sharon, more than likely there is. Unfortunately, I don't. Sometimes individual local cultures, I'm not as familiar with them. Um, uh, but if there are cultural taboos about asking what would be considered probing questions too soon in the relationship, maybe this has to happen over a few different conversations. I coach people on this framework of business development conversations, not just these introductory ones, but how do you probe for needs and help people find the solution? Um, of those 4 building blocks, they can happen in one sitting. They can happen over several sittings. So I would say, I will defer to you and trust you to understand what the cultural differences or norms are where you are. And if being so forward with these questions is not advisable, take it back, slow it down. Um, um, uh, and I know there are places where to talk about oneself is not necessarily good manners. So to be so probing at the onset to say, tell me about you, tell me about this you're experiencing, tell me about your friends, again, you may have to dial back from that. So I'd say there's some sensitivity there too.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think we've run into that in a few situations with the ILN. Um, yeah. And then we've just had a couple of people say thank you. Thank you so much for sharing this. One of our French marketing professionals, Martin Fauvel, says he's currently working on promoting this kind of perspective to the partners at his firm and says that your insights are truly valuable. And Sharon also says, thanks so much for the webinar and your answers.
Happy to do it. I love this topic. I love the idea of building relationships, not only to further your business, but to have you be fulfilled as a professional and be fulfilled as a person. One of the things about that trusted advisor curve is not only do you develop trust with people, but you're more fulfilled. We don't make products. We don't sell products. We are the people who deliver our own services, and we want to feel heard and respected by our clients. And when you have those tight relationships and there is that mutual admiration and respect, it's very, very rewarding. So I think there's also that kind of ulterior motive here. Good intention, but an ulterior motive.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, John. We really appreciate this. And thank you so much to everybody who participated. If you do have any final questions, just drop them in the chat or the Q&A box. But I will also be sending out the recording for this webinar so you can watch it on demand, as well as providing you with John's direct contact information so you can reach out to him directly as well. And we will be back soon with another webinar for you all to enjoy. And in the meantime, please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.